Have you ever wondered if the word witchcraft has any connection to the Bible? It actually does, and the Bible sheds light on what God thinks about it. In the scriptures, you'll find several instances of witchcraft, but there's one particular story we'll dive into today. It's the story of a man who was once staunchly against witchcraft, but surprisingly, sought a witch's help towards the end of his life. What could lead someone to such a drastic change? And what lessons can we draw from his life? You can find this intriguing tale in 1 Samuel 28. Saul, the first king of Israel, found himself in a tough spot 2 years after the prophet Samuel's death. The Philistines were causing a lot of trouble, and Saul needed answers from God. He tried consulting God through the prophets, but he got no response. In his desperation, he took an unexpected turn and sought out a witch to help him find the answers he desperately needed. Now, this encounter with the witch is quite a revealing story when it comes to witchcraft in the Bible. In fact, you could say it's the most explicit account of witchcraft in the entire Bible. Before all of this, Saul wasn't a guy who had any love for witchcraft or witches. He'd gone to great lengths to eliminate them from the land to keep it pure and free from witchcraft practices. So, what made Saul, a man who had shunned witchcraft, become the central character in a tale involving it? Well, it all starts with Saul's humble beginnings. Let's dive a little into some background stories, but before then, please make sure you subscribe to this channel for more captivating revelations from the Bible. God chose King Saul as the first king of Israel after the Israelites had rejected the idea of Samuel's sons being their priests and asked for a king instead. Apparently, Saul began as a humble man, but as he settled into his exalted role, pride crept in. His pride led him to stop depending on God and start doing things on his own. He saw himself as high and mighty since he was the first king and looked down on everyone. Even Samuel, the most revered man in the land, was careful of Saul. When God told Samuel to go to Jesse's house to anoint David, he was reluctant. He told God Saul would kill him if he ever found out he had anointed another person as king. Unfortunately, his pride turned his heart away from God to feeling self-sufficient. However, pride wasn't Saul's only problem. He had more serious issues. Saul had a bad habit of disobeying God's commands. More than once, he ignored God's instructions and did whatever pleased him. For instance, there was a time when God had specifically ordered Saul to wipe out the Amalekites and destroy everything in their land without taking any spoils. But when Saul's army arrived, they kept the best animals and even spared the king. God was far from pleased with Saul's actions. After Saul had disobeyed God's direct orders, the prophet Samuel came to him. Saul still didn't own up to what he did. He first said he had done what God told him to do. Then, when Samuel probed further, he said he only kept back the animals to sacrifice to God. Furious at his disobedience, Samuel didn't mince words. He told Saul that God had rejected him as king. At this point, you might expect Saul to fall to his knees, seeking forgiveness. Well, not quite. Instead, he had the audacity to ask Samuel to protect his image and reputation before the people. Clearly, Saul cared more about his public standing than his relationship with God, and that's where he went wrong. As if that wasn't enough, Saul's issues continued when he discovered that God had chosen David to be the next king. Instead of acting like an elder and David's father-in-law, Saul went on a wild goose chase after the young man, neglecting his duties as king. Now, the incident that led Saul to that witch was connected to one of the many wars between Israel and the Philistines during his reign. Saul was becoming increasingly paranoid and desperate to know the outcome of an impending battle. He turned to the prophets for answers, but they couldn't provide guidance. With the war looming, he felt cornered and asked his servants to find a medium to give him some insight. It's important to note that back in those days, it was common to consult prophets for guidance on various matters. For example, even before Saul became king, he was sent to find his father's missing donkeys, and they consulted a prophet, Samuel, who helped them. However, the law was clear. Witchcraft and mediums were strictly forbidden. Leviticus 19:31. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. It's a direct command from God. The law went as far as instructing them not to spare a witch, but to kill them. Saul, too, had adhered to this law until this desperate moment when he decided to seek out a witch. So Saul's servants found a witch in a place called Endor, and he went to see her in disguise. The witch, upon seeing him, was hesitant because she knew that the king had prohibited all forms of witchcraft. Saul reassured her that she wouldn't face any harm and convinced her to consult with him. He specifically asked her to summon Samuel. So the witch began her ritual and soon informed Saul that she could see an elderly figure. Saul assumed it must be Samuel, and at this point, the woman realized that the man before her was indeed Saul, who had been in disguise. She was understandably fearful, but Saul urged her not to be afraid. He was desperate for answers and willing to go to great lengths to get them. In 1 Samuel 28, 13, 14, 19, it's described like this. The woman reported seeing a ghostly figure rising from the earth, an old man wearing a robe. Saul recognized this as Samuel and bowed down, prostrating himself with his face to the ground. Samuel asked Saul why he had disturbed him, and Saul explained that he was in great distress due to the Philistine threat. He felt abandoned by God, receiving no guidance through prophets or dreams, which is why he had turned to Samuel for answers. Samuel's response was grim. He asked why Saul sought his counsel when the Lord had departed from him and become his enemy. Samuel then delivered a harsh message. God had torn the kingdom from Saul and given it to David, one of his neighbors. This was because Saul had failed to obey the Lord's command regarding the Amalekites. Samuel predicted that both Saul and his sons would die in battle, and Israel would fall into the hands of the Philistines. After hearing these dreadful pronouncements, Saul collapsed to the ground. Despite God's rejection, Saul remained on the throne, causing the deaths of many Israelites in the ongoing battle. Even at this, Saul still didn't repent or ask for mercy. His life is quite different from that of David. David had committed adultery and even murder before prophet Nathan came to him. After encountering the prophet, David tore his clothes and immediately started pleading for mercy. As grievous as his offense was, God still pardoned him. Saul's choice to consult a witch instead of seeking God in his time of desperation was his downfall. Even though the witch appeared to summon Samuel, it didn't change God's original verdict. God had already rejected Saul as king, and his continued reign was a forceful act on his part. The kingdom was already in disarray, and Saul's actions only contributed to divine judgment. Saul's encounter with the medium has sparked quite a bit of controversy and differing opinions. Some believe that the figure the witch summoned wasn't really Samuel, but an evil spirit in disguise, aiming to bring about Saul's downfall. Others think the witch genuinely raised Samuel from the dead through her magic. Some even believe it was a trick or deception, with Samuel not truly present. We know that the events foretold on that day eventually came to pass, as God originally promised. One common interpretation among Christians is that who the witch summoned was not truly Samuel, but rather a deceptive supernatural apparition allowed by God. It's believed that God used this apparition to convey a message without violating his own laws. This interpretation helps reconcile the elements that suggest a real appearance of Samuel with strong arguments against it. It also explains the surprise of the medium, who likely expected a typical illusion. However, it's essential to note that this interpretation doesn't endorse or justify necromancy. The Bible frowns against such practices. God's children should never turn to evil spirits for answers in any situation. Anyone who seeks strange spirits is in essence turning away from God and should expect divine punishment unless they repent. This concludes our exploration of witchcraft in the Bible. Thank you for joining us today. Remember that faith is a light that guides us through life's darkest moments. If you found this video inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more enlightening content. Keep walking in faith, and we'll see you in the next video. Until then, may God's blessings shine upon you.